The heroes of this story were not generals or ace pilots. They were the men covered in grease and engine oil, the crew chiefs and master mechanics of the 91st Bomb Group at Bassingbourn. And among them, one man stood out, Master Sergeant Jack Hadley, a former crop duster mechanic from Texas, whose intuitive understanding of aerodynamics was as vast as the planes he came from. Hadley didn't see a B-17 as an untouchable weapon of war. He saw it as a machine of wires, pulleys, and metal that could be adjusted, tuned, and improved. He was the guy pilots sought out when a plane felt sluggish, the wizard who could diagnose an engine's ailment just by listening to its cough. And he was haunted by the same reoccurring nightmare, a fortress named Wee Willie that he'd personally maintained, spiraling down, completely uncontrollable after losing 2 engines to flak. He knew the boys inside. He'd signed off on the pre-flight inspection himself. The official reports called it catastrophic structural failure. Hadley called it a failure of imagination. The crazy idea was born in a pub over warm beer with a few other trusted crew chiefs. Hadley sketched on a napkin. The problem was the rudder and ailerons. When 2 engines on one wing died, the force was too great for the pilot to overcome using the standard control surfaces. The plane simply wouldn't respond. Hadley's forbidden solution was deceptively simple. They would re-rig the control cables. They would intentionally misalign the neutral position of the rudder and ailerons, giving the pilot a permanent, built-in bias against the dead wing. It was like setting the steering wheel of a car to permanently pull slightly to the right to counteract a strong crosswind. In a B-17, this meant massive, unauthorized adjustments to the cable tensioners in the tail and wings, creating an artificial counterforce that would help the pilot fight the drag. It wasn't a new part. It was a new setup, a secret handshake between the mechanic and the machine. The conflict was immediate and came from within their own chain of command. When Hadley cautiously floated the idea to his squadron engineering officer, he was shut down instantly. It was illegal. The Boeing engineers in Seattle had designed the flight control systems to precise, tested specifications. Any modification, especially one that altered the fundamental handling characteristics of the aircraft, was strictly forbidden by technical orders. It was insane. What if the misrigging caused a problem on takeoff? What if it made the plane unstable in formation? The risks were incalculable. The opposition wasn't just bureaucratic. It was philosophical. The U.S. Army Air Forces ran on standardization. Every B-17 had to be identical, so any pilot could fly any plane. Hadley's modification would create a special aircraft, a rogue plane that didn't follow the rules. He was ordered to cease all discussion of the idea. The lives of airmen were to be saved by better training and tighter formations, not by the reckless tinkering of a ground crew sergeant. The mechanic's hands were tied, but his conscience was not.
The order to stand down was a piece of paper, but the memory of Wee Willie was a ghost that rode on Jack Hadley's shoulders every single day. He looked at the fresh-faced pilots and crews climbing into their fortresses for their first missions, and he made a silent, defiant decision. He would do it. He would illegally modify his hangar's flagship B-17, a battle-weary but reliable bird named the Phantom Fortress. He enlisted his most trusted crew, men who shared his obsession with bringing everyone home. They worked in the dead of night, long after the official shifts had ended, their work illuminated by hooded lanterns. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, not of combat, but of discovery. If they were caught, it meant a court-martial. But to them, the greater crime was inaction. This is where we get into the nerd stuff, the beautiful, mechanical genius of Hadley's gamble. The B-17's flight controls were a labyrinth of cables and pulleys, a physical connection between the pilot's muscles and the giant rudder and ailerons. Hadley's target was the trim tabs, small adjustable surfaces on the trailing edges of the main control surfaces. Their official job was to fine-tune the plane's balance, to relieve steady pressure on the control yokes. Hadley's team, with an almost surgical precision, began to re-rig the entire system. They deliberately misaligned the tab on the rudder and the aileron on the left wing, setting them to a permanent, slight angle. It was a calculated miscalibration. They were essentially preloading the controls, creating a constant, subtle force that would push the tail right and the left wing down. In normal flight, the pilots would have to apply a slight but constant pressure to the right to counteract it. But in a nightmare scenario, a dead left wing, that very pressure would become their salvation, fighting the drag from the moment the second engine failed. The first test was the most terrifying moment of Hadley's life. It wasn't an official test, it was a secret one, conducted on a routine transfer flight to a maintenance depot. Hadley himself was on board, his fate tied to the cruise. The pilot, a young captain named Miller who was in on the secret, first noted the unusual pressure needed to keep the plane straight and level. "She's pulling hard to the right, Jack," he said over the intercom, his voice tight with anxiety. Then came the moment of truth. Over the Irish Sea, clear of other traffic, Captain Miller simulated the failure. He throttled back the left side engines one by one. The first engine went to zero thrust. The plane yawed, but the controls were firm. Then the second engine on the left was feathered. Its propeller blades turned edge-on to the wind to reduce drag. This was the moment that always led to the spiral. The plane immediately began to veer left. The co-pilot grunted, straining at his yoke, but then something miraculous happened. The constant right rudder bias that Hadley had built in was already there, fighting back. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. With immense physical effort, the pilots held her level. They had proven it could be controlled. But the test wasn't over. The real failure came when they tried to climb. They pushed the two remaining engines on the right wing to maximum war emergency power. The asymmetric thrust was overwhelming. The plane began to lose altitude, slowly, inexorably. They couldn't maintain height. They had proven control was possible, but the price was a gradual, sinking retreat. Hadley's modification had saved them from a spin, but it hadn't given them the sky. They landed, the mood somber. They had defied physics, but not conquered it. The aha moment didn't come from a manual, but from a pilot's instinct. As the Phantom Fortress sank towards the sea, Captain Miller, instead of fighting the descent, did something counterintuitive. He eased the pressure on the controls, accepting the gradual loss of altitude, but focusing everything on maintaining airspeed. He realized that trying to climb was burning their energy and straining the engines to the breaking point. But in a controlled, shallow descent, the plane could fly almost efficiently. The modification gave them the stability to do this without spiraling. Hadley, watching the airspeed indicator and the altimeter, saw it too. The problem wasn't lift, it was energy management. The breakthrough was a new flight profile. Accept the descent, nurse the two remaining engines, and trade altitude for distance. They wouldn't come home high and proud, but they would come home. They refined the technique in a second, even more secret test flight, finding the precise angle of descent and power settings that would maximize their glide back to friendly territory. The modification gave them control, But this new piloting technique gave them a chance. The real test came on a bone-chilling mission over Bremen. The Phantom Fortress was flying tail-end Charlie, its familiar, illegally adjusted frame shuddering through flak bursts. Then, a Focke-Wulf 190 ripped through the formation. Cannon shells tore into the left wing. The number 1 engine erupted in flames and had to be feathered. Seconds later, a flak burst shattered the number 2 engine, which seized instantly. This was the nightmare scenario. The plane violently yawed left, the dead wing dropping like a stone. Inside, the crew braced for the spin. But Captain Miller and his co-pilot, expecting it, fought back, and the Hadley modification did its job. The preset bias bit in, a hidden hand on the controls. The fight was brutal, muscles straining, but the plane responded. It was unstable, it was wounded, but it was flyable. "She's holding, Jack! She's holding!" Miller yelled over the intercom to Hadley, who was manning a waist gun. They feathered the dead prop, firewalled the 2 right engines, and began the long, slow descent. They were losing about 200 feet per minute, but they were flying straight. For 3 hours, they crept back across the North Sea, a sitting duck for any enemy fighter, but none found them. They crossed the English coast at just 2,000 feet, a crippled ghost of a bomber. The payoff was a sight that no one at Bassingbourn had ever seen before. A B-17 with 2 dead engines on 1 wing, flying steady and level on final approach. The control tower was silent, then erupted in disbelieving chatter. The landing was rough, the tires smoking as they hit the runway, but it was a landing. The Phantom Fortress had come home. As the props spun down, the crew emerged not as shaken victims of a near catastrophe, but as triumphant pioneers. They had done the impossible. They had cheated physics, defied death, and proven that a fortress could be more than its design. In that moment, the secret was out. The illegal modification wasn't just a theory, it was a lifesaver. The impact was as immediate as it was clandestine. There was no official bulletin from high command, no change to the technical orders. But across the air bases of the 8th Air Force, the news spread through the mechanics' grapevine, a whisper in the hangars, a knowing nod on the hard stand. Crew chiefs, empowered by Hadley's proof, began performing the same illegal re-rigging on their own planes. They did it quietly, efficiently, and without permission. It was a silent rebellion of wrenches and wisdom, a grassroots effort to arm their fortresses with a fighting chance. The modification, soon nicknamed the Hadley Hack, didn't change the bombers on the drawing board, it changed them on the front line. It couldn't prevent a plane from being shot down, but it gave a crew a precious gift they never had before: options. Where once there was only a death spiral, now there was a path. A long, slow, desperate path, but a path home. The statistics are haunting. While no official study was ever conducted, anecdotal evidence from squadron after squadron suggests that the adoption of the Hadley Hack dramatically increased the rate of successful emergency landings following dual-engine failure on one wing. Where the expected survival rate in such a scenario was virtually zero, mechanics and pilots began reporting miracle returns. Dozens, then scores of B-17s limped back to base, full of holes, missing 2 engines on one side, but flying straight and level enough to land. Each one of those returning bombers represented 10 men who avoided death or captivity, 10 men who lived to fly another day, because a mechanic dared to break the rules. The legacy of Master Sergeant Jack Hadley is not found in a famous patent or a major aerospace firm. It is etched into the very philosophy of modern aviation. The Hadley Hack was the crude, brilliant forerunner of the stability augmentation systems and fly-by-wire controls that are standard in every aircraft today. It proved that the machine could be made to compensate for its own vulnerabilities, that intelligence could be built into its very bones. Jack Hadley and men like him were the unsung architects of survival. the quiet, determined individuals who looked at a fortress and found a way to make it truly strong. They took a standard-issue weapon of war and through sheer ingenuity forged it into something more. They created a legend, an illegal act of maintenance that became a true war relic. What other hidden stories of ingenuity are waiting in the logbooks and maintenance records of history? What other forgotten fixes born from desperation and defiance changed the course of battles and saved countless lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to the War Relic to uncover more stories of the impossible made possible. The legacy of Master Sergeant Jack Hadley is not found in a famous patent or a major aerospace firm. It is etched into the very philosophy of modern aviation. The Hadley Hack was the crude, brilliant forerunner of the stability augmentation systems and fly-by-wire controls that are standard in every aircraft today. It proved that the machine could be made to compensate for its own vulnerabilities, that intelligence could be built into its very bones. Jack Hadley and men like him were the unsung architects of survival, the quiet, determined individuals who looked at a fortress and found a way to make it truly strong. They took a standard-issue weapon of war and, through sheer ingenuity, forged it into something more. They created a legend, an illegal act of maintenance that became a true war relic. What other hidden stories of ingenuity are waiting in the logbooks and maintenance records of history? What other forgotten fixes, born from desperation and defiance, changed the course of battles and saved countless lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to the War Relic to uncover more stories of the impossible made possible.